So yeah, is it going to take more money? Absolutely. However, if you're in this to win this, don't give them the opportunity to come to your house and kick down your door and put you in jail and take your business, because they are itching to do so and put it all into the hands of big corporations and big pharmaceutical companies, etc. They are dying to do that because now they have an excuse. People are dying. And they can go ahead and blame however way they're going to blame it. They're just going to throw it at, literally like throwing spaghetti at a wall, see what sticks. Whatever the populace is going to go with. And when you're hearing about some of these insiders at these companies that are doing the whistleblowing on these companies that are trading on the Canadian Stock Exchange, that are selling contaminated products to foreign countries, and then this surprise when they're busted selling contaminated products to another country, and you wonder why, because at the end of the day, you wouldn't grow that and give it to your grandma. You wouldn't grow that and give it to your sister who has cancer. You wouldn't grow that and give it to your daughter or your son who's dealing with seizures. You wouldn't grow the contaminated product and give it to them. Why would you do it to anybody else?
Well, and here's another thing too. I mean, this relates to our overall food supply. And you've got companies like Monsanto that are creating plants to exist and thrive being treated with glyphosate or Roundup, for example. And they're giving the food that they're producing to the livestock that is later being sold as meat. And they're giving the grain to foreign countries to solve the hunger problem. And in the meanwhile, they're causing other problems, an uptick in cancers and autism and diseases that scientists are now connecting back to these chemicals that are sprayed in these wide swaths of land, not to mention the contamination of our water tables, which is a whole other problem. And the government's not doing anything to protect us, and all we can do is just learn about it and then go protect ourselves by growing things that are certified organic, but even that is not protecting us 100% from all of these pathogens and toxins and chemicals that are being used to grow mass quantities of crops. And so it stands to reason that the larger the company producing medical cannabis, they want to maximize their yields and use some of the same agricultural practices. I mean, it seems as though we need some major legislation. The Food Act actually barred adulterated food. And if you consider that food that's been genetically modified to grow without weeds growing next to them, then that seems to me like it's adulteration of food. But for some reason, producers of genetically modified foods were exempted from that act. And also something I heard, and you might know something about this, there's this common practice of using glyphosate, which is the main ingredient of Roundup, to dry cannabis plants. Do you know where this is happening and how this can be called out for what it is?
Well, glyphosate is a desiccant, so it dries out products. And have I heard about it? Yes. Where it was, British Columbia, Canada. And what they were doing with the products after they dried them out, and they were then processing them and making them into whatever, whether it's vapes or whether it's creams or lotions or potions or whatever. Can't say, because magically it disappears into, the black hole of forgetfulness, where everyone doesn't want to talk about those bad things because it doesn't make you feel safe when you're eating or when you're going out for a nice dinner with your friends, with your family, etc. So what can be done? Wow. I'll put it this way. The cannabis industry is a microcosm of the bigger ag industry. So all the hair and warts and nastiness that you're seeing on the cannabis market, in this space right now, is what is existent in the food production space. And if you mention certain groups, let's say you're making a claim against the cattle industry, they'll serve you with an injunction, and you're a terrorist for mentioning it. If it's against the dairy guys, same thing. You're now a economic terrorist because you're questioning the powers that be and what they're doing. But I mean, when you get a gallon of milk, do you really realize that that gallon has the milk of over 500 cows in it? Wow. Okay. Not one cow, 500. So can we do much about that? But it can't.
Aside from going vegan?
Even if you're going vegan, who's growing food? Is it a certified place? Are they using certified ingredients? Because I have friends of mine that they have just debilitating issues for no apparent reason other than the food that they're eating. And a lot of these folks are vegans, they're vegetarians, and they still have these incredible health issues. And the one common denominator always seems to be what they're eating, what they ingest. So, is it the food? Are there gram-negative bacteria inherent? Are there pathogens? Are there molds? Are all these kinds of things out there? Sure, I've seen them. What to do about them? I recommend people grow their own food, that neighborhoods grow their own food, have food forests. You have all these schools and all these churches all over the place, and they have these wonderful green grass lawns that nobody plays on anymore. Why don't you put together a food forest? Why don't they feed them with organic nutrients? And then they do farmers markets and the communities themselves, as opposed to having the expectation that the government is going to solve your problems. Man, get together as a community, get together as a neighborhood, get together as a church, as a whatever, and do it yourself, because they're not going to solve these problems. So do you drink the water out of the tap? No. You run it through a charcoal filter, you run it through reverse osmosis, and then you got water that's at least clean to start with. If you don't want the contaminants, if you don't want the chlorine, the fluoramine, if you don't want all of that, plus all the pathogens and anything else that's in there, clean your water. Provide an RO system for you and your neighbors to go ahead and pull water off of. If you don't want the contaminated vegetables and fruits, great. Do a community garden. Make sure that the components that they're throwing into the soils aren't going to go ahead and poison you. Real simple. Again, once upon a time, there was this thing called community within our country. They'd have these victory gardens. Everybody had a victory garden at their house. They would grow their own stuff. The guy that grew the lemons that were great would trade with the guy that grew tomatoes. And that guy was trading with the lady that was growing cucumbers or peppers, who was then trading with the person that was growing peaches. Is it so crazy?
I think that you're bringing up a very beautiful concept. And, we've seen some slow food movements throughout the country where they're setting up school gardens and, teaching people to appreciate where their food comes from and to grow it organically. And, these things are cropping up, but they're not really that common in the cities or in the suburbs, where you've got a grocery store on every corner and you can just go in and buy your processed food. It's a lot more convenient to do that than it is to sacrifice the time and energy and coordination. And I think that with cannabis, it's a lot more complex because it's illegal to grow cannabis unless you live in a state that allows you to grow it yourself. And then, of course, if you want to create a medicine that's something other than smoking it like a cigarette, which you don't want to give a 5-year-old with epilepsy a cigarette, then, it's a matter of having your own laboratory, which is cost prohibitive. And I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why this is it's a beautiful concept, but it's impractical or impossible for some, just simply because of the laws and or financial constraints. So
I agree with you, but at the end of the day, where there's a will, there's a way.
Oh, I agree.
And I work with a group called Enrich LA, 60 schools all across Los Angeles, putting in gardens. I donate fertilizer to the guys. They use organic fertilizer so the kids growing the stuff can actually have something that's going to be impressive, that they will say, wow, I grew this. And could it be done on a larger scale? Sure. If the community got behind it, if the people that were part of the school boards got behind it, if there was more interest, sure. can be done.
I agree with you that it can be done, and it is being done in certain areas and successfully. But what about cannabis? And okay, going back to like the vape issue.
If you have one guy that you know that grows great weed, make sure that you keep helping him grow great weed. Make sure that he keeps the business, because that's really what all this is boiling down to. When you get one guy that is undercutting the next guy who's undercutting the next guy, that's slashing the last guy's throat and making no money, well, then you deserve what you get. Because if the guy that is growing the good stuff, those components that he's putting into that good stuff are not cheap and not free. The guy that is growing the crappiest of the crap, yeah, he's going to get you a better deal, but it's also going to be reflective in the products and the medicine that he's making. So if you, again, I know people, I know one person in particular, she doesn't grow a lot. She has her plants. She tends to them very, very well. She's picked up clones from me in the past. She's bought fertilizer from me in the past. And what does she do? She reduces it down into her oils. She makes her tinctures. She makes her body salves, lotions, potions, all of that. And it's the most effective medicine that I've ever seen. It works. That's the difference between that and the garbage you buy at the dispensary. God, they just did a deal on Amazon. I believe it was Dr. Mercola. And they were buying all these CBD products off of Amazon.com. And all of them had 0 CBD. So, if it's too good to be true, guess what it is? Does it have what? There was a phrase when I used to be in the gold and the silver business, buying and selling bricks and bars and coins. Nice stuff isn't cheap, and cheap stuff isn't nice. And that should be, to a great extent, what you're thinking about when you're buying your medicine from somebody who is putting the love into making that the happiest plant possible, or somebody who's going to be using the cheapest stuff available that has got more toxins in it because it's cheaper so he can make more money. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And then it would seem that there would be a place, though, for regulation to insist that we go back to these basics and prohibiting the toxic practices that are triggering all of these autoimmune diseases and neurological diseases and cancer. And right now, we're living in this environment where these shortcuts are being championed by government subsidies and the law looking away from the culpability of these companies for causing all of these problems. I mean, the pharmaceuticals have gotten away for years with the veritable genocide and are now only coming home to roost with some private lawsuits that are benefiting a few people who signed on for class actions. But for the rest of us, doctors are still prescribing these drugs that are killing people, from opiates to benzodiazepines to Tylenol. And it seems as though our country needs to, come together, as you said, and start building community food sources and supporting local farmers and supporting those who are doing things the right way, buying organic products, really knowing their medicine if they're buying cannabis, and supporting those who are doing it right. Check out the certificates of analysis. But it seems as though we also need to consider this back to basic strategy to decontaminate our food supply with legislation. I mean, am I far off with that?
I believe that you're laser beam focused on exactly what needs to be done. However, you mentioned earlier, there is a phalanx of lobbyists that are keen to block whatever we feel would be the right thing to do. Because again, it still boils down to what's the right thing to do. I'm in the industry. I found out about 3 months ago that my sister has leukemia. What did I do? Made a couple of phone calls to people that I know to make sure that I have what I need to give her. I don't have to worry about the certificates of analysis. They're there. I don't have to worry about the medicines that they're producing.